As we approached the 1978 election, it was pretty clear that Senator John McClellan, who had been in the Senate for nearly 35 years, was going to retire from the Senate. And indeed, in 1977, he announced that he was going to retire, and then just shortly thereafter died, and the successor was appointed. But what had happened with long tenure of Fulbright and of McClellan in the Senate is this huge backlog of political talent had developed in the state. So in this open race in 1978, and open races for the U.S. Senate in Arkansas were very rare, three incredibly potent politicians announced for that office. First off was the governor, David Pryor.
As people, and I respect as people. And I share the hopes that we have for tomorrow and the challenges that we must express together.
Ever since I was, a child growing up in Camden, I had always wanted to be a United States Senator. I don't think there was any question whether I would get into that race. Senator McClellan died in 1977, and probably in November. We had sort of political dynasties that, the Millses and the Fulbrights and the McClellans and what have you, but this was an opening and I knew I had to move.
Jim Guy Tucker, a congressman from Central Arkansas, one of the rising stars of Arkansas politics, former Attorney General, he decides he's going to make the race. Ray Thornton, who is the congressman from South Arkansas, gained a lot of fame as one of the heroes of in the Judiciary Committee during the Nixon impeachment hearings.
So you have all three of these guys. And obviously Pryor ultimately prevails, but the two losers in this race, they go on after hiatuses from political office. They come back into political office. Ray Thornton becomes a congressman again and then becomes a Supreme Court justice. Jim Guy Tucker becomes lieutenant governor and then governor. So that just shows how much talent there was in this Democratic primary in 1978. It was incredibly closely watched.
The three of us squared off in the Democratic primaries of 1978, and it was, as they say, a gully washer. It was a hard campaign. I was in the runoff with Jim Guy Tucker. I prevailed and went to Washington in early '79.
He was another breath of fresh air, and actually he had the ability as a man who was obviously sophisticated to look as though to sound as though and act as though he was down home, and it worked. Not everybody can do that. It's a real magic trick, and perhaps because it's genuine.
Pryor the favorite going in, but it was clear that the other two candidates had strong support. In Central Arkansas, Tucker really was maximizing the population center there in that Central Arkansas TV market. And down in South Arkansas, Thornton was dominant, and Thornton had resources that the other candidates really lacked, and those came in the form of his family members, Stevens' family, Whit Stevens and Jack Stevens, and they provided a tremendous source of funds for Ray Thornton, and it made it essentially a three-way photo finish in the first primary. Pryor snuck through with about 34%, but it was not until the next day that it was clear who the second place finisher was, and that was Jim Guy Tucker. He snuck in. And so then we turned to the two-week runoff, and all eyes were on what was going to happen to Ray Thornton's support, because clearly that was going to decide the primary. Now, geographically, because of his base of support in South Arkansas, that favored David Pryor because he had represented that area of Congress before. But Pryor had failed to meet expectations, and so there was some momentum with Jim Guy Tucker. And then the final kind of interesting piece in that Democratic runoff was what was going on with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had been the Attorney General for 2 years and had won the governor's primary in 1978 overwhelmingly. And so he was already the de facto governor of the state. And I think many feel that he saw Jim Guy Tucker as a potential threat for him politically in the future. And so, although there was nothing overt, there's lots of circumstantial evidence that in that runoff, Bill Clinton, certainly his hopes were that David Pryor would win that, and he did some things that probably helped David Pryor in that runoff election.
And when we got in the runoff, a lot of people said, I think, well, this guy, Jim Guy Tucker, is going to be a threat to Bill Clinton down the way, and we need Pryor. He's not going to be a threat. Or maybe they said we can knock him off in a few years a lot easier than we can knock off Jim Guy Tucker because he may be president. I mean, he was a mover in Washington. He went on the Ways and Means Committee his first term, which is unheard of, and he was really a very, he was a star in Washington during his first couple of years there.
And in the end, David Pryor wins that runoff by about 10 points. And David Pryor goes on to a really nonstop political career in the U.S. Senate, serving until he retired in 1996. David Pryor, someone who probably became the most beloved Arkansas politician of the latter parts of the 20th century, and that he had a personal style that was just unmatched. I mean, he could walk into coffee shops, into restaurants, and his ability to backslap, interact with people in a distinctly Arkansas way, just totally connected with Arkansas voters, and was amazingly popular. And although nationally he was probably the least known of the three major Arkansas Democratic political figures of the late 20th century, Clinton, Bumpers, and Pryor, he was the one that Arkansans in their heart probably loved the most.